Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters, Kodashim of the Most High. Today we're talking about Hannukah. What's that all about? Is it biblical? Is it just a tradition added to the biblical feast? I think most are aware of the Messiah and his rebuke to the Pharisees and them superseding the Torah with their traditions. I've seen many online critics say that Hannukah is just another one of those man-made traditions, that it's not one of the Moedim listed in Leviticus 23, which is true. It's not one of the 3 appointed times to make offerings listed in Leviticus 23, which is specifically all about the times of the year it's required to bring offerings for the nation. In Mark 7:3, we see that the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. And when they came from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions that they observe, such as washing of cups and pots and vessels and dining couches. Matthew 15:1, Then the Pharisees and scribes came to Yahushua from Jerusalem and said, Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat. He answered them, And why do you break the commandment of Elohim for the sake of your tradition? Now, in the context of the Messiah, he was rebuking them for adding cleansing rituals to the Torah and condemning them for being hypocrites, for not keeping the very burdens that they put on the people. Well, what about Hannukah? We see in John that the Messiah himself went to Hannukah and he heals a blind man. It says here in John 9:25 that he healed a blind man, and we see, continue reading into chapter 10, the time was Hannukah and it was winter. And we have to ask ourselves, if he was so against participating in this event, then why would he even show up? Do you show up to events that you would consider to be added to the Torah? Serious question. It's possible, right? Go to where the sinner is? Sure. But the issue I see, and I've been guilty of this myself, is that we've conflated all traditions that aren't mandated as somehow as adding to the Torah. Even Paul mentions keeping the traditions and wasn't completely against all traditions that were not mandated in the Torah. Paul encourages believers to keep the traditions that were handed down to them. In 1 Corinthians 11:20, Now I commend you that because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions, even as I deliver them to you. 2 Thessalonians 2:15, So then, brothers, stand firm and hold to the traditions that you were taught by us, either by our spoken word or by our letter. So this word traditions is paradosis. The Greek word para, meaning alongside, like parallel, and didomai, which means to give or to transmit. Some people think this is a reference to the oral Torah, as it was transmitted by mouth. Maybe that's the case, maybe. But maybe he's just talking about ordinances or precepts, the mitzvah. Maybe a different video for a different time, we can dive into that. The question for this video is about Hannukah. Now, this is a disclaimer here. This is not an endorsement for or against what we see folks in certain mainstream sects doing, but rather it's a study on what the Bible says about Hannukah. In this study, we're going to let Yah explain the history of Hannukah via his scriptures. Now, the word Hannukah means dedication or consecration. It's to set something apart, synonymous with kadosh, right? To make holy. It's rooted in the word chanach, which is to train, like training a child in the way he should go. It's also rooted in the same as Enoch, Kanach, the one who walked with Yah. He was dedicated. And it's in the same word family as kin, the Hebrew word for grace, or kana, the word for pitch, like in a pitching a tent or to encamp. Ket noon, paleographically, is to fence off, to encompass the seed, the heritage. And the first biblical reference to Hannukah is in Numbers chapter 7, where they are dedicating the altar and priest, and Yahuwah is clearly behind this Hannukah dedication. Numbers 7:1. And it came to pass on the day that Moshe had fully set up the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and had anointed it, Mishkah, and sanctified it. So he consecrated it, and all the instruments thereof, both the altar and the vessels thereof, and had anointed them and sanctified them. Moving to verse 4. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, accept these from them, that they may be used in the service, the tent of meeting, the tent of Moed, where we get Moedim, right? And give them to the Levites, to every man according to his service. So for context, we see that Moshe had set up the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and Yahuwah gives him Torah instructions to take and accept the offerings from the leaders of the tribes for the service of the tabernacle. If we keep reading in this chapter to verse 10, it says, and the chiefs offered offerings for the dedication, Channukah, of the altar on the day it was anointed. And the chiefs offered their offering before the altar. Verse 84, this was the Hannukah, the offering, the dedication of the altar, on the day when it was anointed, from the chiefs of Israel, 12 silver plates, 12 silver basins, 12 golden dishes. So for 12 days, each prince or leader from each of the 12 tribes would bring an offering, one for each day. If we continue into the next chapter, we see that the lamps of the menorah are instituted. Chapter 8, verses 1 through 2. Now Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you set up the lamps, the 7 lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand. So yes, 7 lamps are to give light. Now here's what's interesting about this particular dedication, this Hannukah. And the question for me was, is this considered a Moedim? Well, technically, yes. This was a Hannukah dedication for erecting the tabernacle on the first day of the year and was to take place every year. However, that only lasted through the time period that they were erecting the tabernacle. This is not a Leviticus 23 Moedim where everyone is bringing offerings, but it was an annual event as an ordination of the altar and priest during the period of the tabernacle erection. And it would also actually be included in the monthly Moedim appointment. Numbers 28:11 says, and in the beginnings of your months you shall offer an ascending smoke offering unto Yahweh, 2 young bullocks, 1 ram, 7 lambs of the first year without spot. The tabernacle is referred to as the tent of Moed, right? It's the tent of congregation. And it's supposed to take place on the first day of each year. We see this instruction given in parallel with the record in Exodus. Exodus 40, verse 1. Yahuwah spoke unto Moshe, saying, on the first day of the first month you shall erect the tabernacle of the tent of congregation, the Moed, and you shall put in it the ark of the testimony, and you shall screen the ark with the veil. And you shall bring in the table and arrange it, and you shall bring up the lampstand and set up its lamps. If we continue reading into verse 12, then you shall bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of congregation, tent of Moed, and shall wash them with water, and put on Aaron the holy garments. And ye shall anoint him and consecrate him, that he may serve me as priest. You shall bring his sons also, and put coats on them, and anoint them, as you anointed their father, that they may serve me as priest, and their anointing shall admit them to a perpetual priesthood throughout their generations. This Moshe did according to all that Yahuwah had commanded him, so he did. In the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was erected. So we see that this dedication was an appointed time on the first day of the first month to be held at the tabernacle of Moed to dedicate priests perpetually. This is the month of Abib, in the beginning of spring. This was a dedication commanded specifically for the tent of Moed, while in the wilderness during the erecting of the tabernacle, and perpetually for priests' ordination. So that was then for the tabernacle. What about when the temple was built in Solomon's day? Well, let's look at a different Hannukah. Fast forward to the dedication of the temple in Solomon's day, which happens in the 7th month. We see that fire comes down from heaven, and that is an indication of Yahweh accepting this Hannukah. Chapter 7, verses 1 through 5, 2 Chronicles. As soon as Solomon finished his prayer, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of Yahweh filled the temple. Verse 5, King Solomon offered a sacrifice of 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the people dedicated the house of Elohim. Chapter 7, verse 9. And on the 8th day they held a solemn assembly, for they had kept the dedication, the Hannukah, of the altar 7 days, and the feast 7 days. On the 23rd day of the 7th month he sent the people away to their homes, joyful and glad of heart for the prosperity that Yahweh had granted to David and to Solomon and to Israel, his people. So 23rd day of the 7th month. Subtract 8 days from the 23rd of the 7th month. That puts this particular Hannukah taking place at Sukkot, the 15th of the 7th month, right? This was a dedication for the first temple. The temple was completed and dedicated at a different date than the tabernacle, and different instructions were given, and that we see it was accepted by Yahweh. Earlier we saw that the Messiah himself was at a dedication in the winter, neither of which are the time of dedication for the tabernacle or the first temple. So why is the Hannukah dedication he participated in taking place in the winter? We'll answer that question in a moment, but let's look at Ezra 6 regarding the second temple Hannukah. Ezra 6:15. And the house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. And the people of Israel, the priests and the Levites, and the rest of the returned exiles, celebrated the Hannukah of this house of Elohim with joy. And just a short time later we see the 14th day of the first month, the returned exiles kept the Passover. And then in Esther, during this same month of Adar is when we have Purim, right? So the month of Adar is equivalent to current day February, March, which is technically still winter. But after the exile and returning to the land on the 3rd day of the month, in the last month of the year, they rededicated the second temple at a completely different time period. And this is when Purim is celebrated, as shown in the book of Esther. So this dedication is for when the house of Yahuwah was finished. Well, guess what? There was another Hannukah prior to this dedication, and it was the Hannukah of Nehemiah, and it was of the wall. In the book of Nehemiah, we see that Hannukah, Nehemiah, for the dedication of the wall happens in the 7th month on Yom Teruah, after completing the wall in the 6th month of Elul, corresponding to our August-September time frame. Ezra stands up to read from the Torah, Nehemiah chapter 6, So the wall was finished on the 25th day in the month of Elul, August, September, in 52 days. Chapter 8. So Ezra, the priest, brought the law before the assembly, both men and women, and all who could understand what they heard, on the first day of the 7th month, Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets. Chapter 12, 27. And at the Hannukah, the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgiving, with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. So we have a different dedication happening at a different time period. One Hannukah for the wall, one Hannukah for the house. In Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 9, it says, And Nehemiah, who was the governor, and Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, This day is holy to Yahuwah your Elohim. Do not mourn or weep. For all the people wept as they heard the words of the Torah. So here we have this dedication of the wall happening on the first day of the 7th month, which is Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets, which is a holy day. This Channukah of the wall happens in the same month as Solomon's Channukah, but on a different day. The wall was Hannukah, dedicated in the 7th month, but as we saw, the completion of the entire house was Hannukah daily dedicated in the 12th month, the month of Adar, late winter, early spring. So clearly we have different dedications, different Hannukahs for different things that take place at different times. So what about today's modern day Hannukah, December, that we see taking place? What is its significance? What's that all about? Well, we learn about today's Hannukah in the book of Maccabees, about an altar dedication taking place in the 9th month of Kislev. Now, whether we believe Maccabees to be scripture or not, or to be a made-up story, I don't think it's relevant to the fact that that is why we see what we see practiced today. Maccabees chapter 4, verse 36, this is where they get it from, says, Then said Judas and his brethren, Behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary. Now on the 25th day of the 9th month, the 25th of Kislev, in the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning, and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar. So it's a new altar of the burnt offerings which they had made. Look at what time and what day the heathen had profaned it. Even in that was it dedicated with songs and with citherns and harps and cymbals. Then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising Elohim of heaven, who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, and offered burnt offerings with gladness, and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. So the second temple had been desecrated. Judas Maccabeus had removed the defiled stones and made a new altar. It appears that this dedication is a dedication to what day and time the heathen profaned it, and he replaced it with a new altar, the defiled stones with a new altar. It's believed that this is the current day Hannukah dedication that takes place today in December on the Gregorian calendar, and at the time when the Messiah walked the earth as well. The tabernacle and its Hannukah dedication was no more from Moshe's day. The first temple and its Hannukah dedication was no more in Solomon's day. And the second temple had been partially restored during the Maccabean revolt. Therefore, they Hanukah'd it. They dedicated it, and the celebration continues today as a memorial and victory over the enemy. In the book of Maccabees, we read about Antiochus Epiphanes, who was originally called Mithridates. Antiochus, so we break this word, anti means against, archus, support. So he's kind of like an anti-Mashiach, an anti-Mishkan, an anti-Torah, anti-Christ, right? The word epiphanies is epi, Greek, is upon, and then phaneros, which is to manifest in the flesh. So it's to say that God is manifest. He claims himself to be God manifest in the flesh. And he set up the abomination that makes desolate in Jerusalem. Much like the Advent, the Epiphany of Jesus, as described by the Roman Catholic Church. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the abomination is related to God in the flesh, who does away with the law, who sits in the temple, making himself Elohim. We read in Maccabees chapter 1, it says, the 15th day of the month of Kislev, and the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and built idol altars throughout the cities of Judah and on every side. And again in chapter 4, Judas and his brethren with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days, and from the 25th day of Kislev, 25th of Kislev, with myrrh and gladness. So from that point onward, it seems that was when our current day Hannukah is celebrated, in dedication to cleansing the sanctuary from the abomination that makes desolate. This seems to be somewhat prophetic as well in regard to the temple, because it's very close to what we see in Haggai. Haggai was prophesying to Zerubbabel and to Yahusha about building the second temple. But look what he says here in Haggai chapter 2, verse 7. And I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come. And I will fill this house with glory, says Yahweh of hosts. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than the former, says Yahweh of hosts. And in this place will I give peace, says Yahweh of hosts. On the 24th day, on the 9th month of Kislev, in the second year of Darius, the word of Yahweh came by Haggai the prophet. Verse 15, and now, I pray you, consider from this day upward, from the 24th of Kislev upward, so that could be the 25th, from before a stone was laid upon a stone in the temple of Yahweh, consider from this day onward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, since the day that the foundation of Yahweh's temple was laid, consider. So that word consider in the Hebrew is to take it to heart. So obviously the abomination that makes desolate was set up after this prophecy to Zerubbabel and Yahusha during the Second Temple period, and it happened in the days of Maccabees. So that house during the rebuilding of the Second Temple was not greater than the former, obviously, right? It had the abomination. He says, the desire of the nations shall come. Many believe this to be alluding to the Messiah. Incidentally, this Hannukah corresponded with December 25th this year. And I think we all know what December 25th is. And since Judaism, they follow a lunisolar calendar, this day moves considerably from year to year in comparison to the Gregorian calendar. And if you saw my video on Yom Kippur and what it has to do with the timing of the birth of Messiah, I show that there's a good possibility he could have been born during this time frame. In Luke 2:21, referring to the Messiah, it says, and when 8 days were accomplished for the circumcising of the child, his name was called Yahusha, which was so named of the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And that's what I show in that video. Luke 1:26-36, the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy during the time of Pesach. Luke 2:30-32, It says, "For my eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all people, a light to lighten the Gentiles, and the glory of thy people Israel." So as commanded in the Torah, the child is dedicated to Yahuwah, circumcised the 8th day, 8-day celebration. The glory of nations shall come. There's no greater dedication than the one given to save all of mankind. Yah has anointed his stones and accepted the offering of his Son by sending down fire on the day of Pentecost, when he poured out his Spirit on mankind, uniting us in one spirit in the temple where he dwells amongst his people. John 2:19-21, Yahushua answered and said unto them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Then said the Jews, 46 years was his temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. Ephesians 5:30, "For we are members of his body. Do you not know you are Yah's temple, and that Yah's Spirit dwells within you?" As each one of us are individual stones in Yah's temple, we are to dedicate ourselves to Yah and to his word, and to bring sight to the blind, and to encourage one another for the hope that is laid up for us. I pray that this study blessed you. I pray that Yah will continue to bless each and every one of you. Thank you for all you do for his temple, how you build it up each day, building up the saints, the Kodashim. Sure and blessed to be a part of this household. I love you. Love to hear from you. Put your comments down below. And remember to like and share and subscribe. Shalom.